Okay, so my idea of horror in this these days is to have to speak to a whole bunch of people who are eating, and after I have been plied with alcohol for the last 20 minutes, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but at the same time, the idea of saying anything sensible has diminished slightly. So. I'd like you, and it was I was supposed to be sitting here, and it was going to be a little bit too cozy for all of us, so I'll be standing. First of all, a little bit about Zymedica. We are a device commercialization company based in Providence, but today we're announcing that we have opened an office in Kendall Square, and it is what we do is essentially help companies bring all the assets to bear to bring their company through commercialization. And what we're going to be doing in Cambridge is really looking at, my focus in the company is looking at early stage business. So in the interest of, we're going to keep this a little lively. And in the interest of doing that, I'm going to ask 3 questions. This is a disruptors panel, and there's no point disrupting unless you're bringing value with that disruption. So I'm going to ask the panelists to tell us who they are in order, just so I'm clear, guys, because I know we've all been, yeah. And then what their value is and what part of the industry that they've disrupted. And I think we've got about 35 minutes here to go to do that. So starting with Bill, let's talk about who you are and what your company does.
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here tonight. It's a great privilege to address you all over dinner. I'm Bill Doyle. I'm the executive chairman of Novacure. Novacure is a cancer therapeutic company. When we think of cancer and we think of cancer therapies, we immediately think of surgery, radiation, and pharmacological therapies. That has been the armamentarium for over 100 years, and there's been over 100 years of development in each one of those therapeutic classes. There's a lot of excitement clearly in the pharmacological space right now. But the other thing that we often associate with all these cancer therapies, including many of the new therapies, is a trade-off between efficacy and severe toxicity side effects. Novacure was founded by a professor at the Technion in Israel. His expertise wasn't surgery, radiation, or chemo. He came from the medical device world, and his expertise was the effects of electrical phenomenon on tissue. And for many, many decades, we've used electric fields in medicine, principally at low frequencies to stimulate nerves and muscles. This is pacemakers, neurostimulators, very interesting new areas in vagal stimulation to treat inflammation and other chronic diseases, as well as at very high frequencies. And if anyone's ever designed an ablation catheter or a cutting and coagulation device, and I see a lot of people that I knew from my J&J days, those are very high frequency electric fields. There's a mid-range radio frequency that was thought to have no effect on tissue. And what Palti hypothesized, and I'll skip to the end very quickly, was that while generally the intermediate frequencies have no biological effect, if you could somehow inject those electric fields into cells while they were dividing, those electric fields would in fact prevent the division and cause those cells to explode. So fast forward 15 years, we figured out how to do that. The first cancer that we've applied it to, and this was as a result of interactions at the FDA where they essentially said, this is where we want you to start, is the deadly brain cancer glioblastoma, or GBM. This is the most common primary brain cancer that heretofore has been a death sentence for all. This is the disease where in Massachusetts that Ted Kennedy was diagnosed with. Joe Biden's son recently died of this disease. We conducted a phase 3. So we are a device, but we do trials as if we were a drug. So we did very large phase 3 trial in newly diagnosed glioblastoma. There's never been, well, there hasn't been a successful advancement in glioblastoma for over a decade. There's never been a trial that's been successful at the interim analysis. We were successful and showed significant improvement in progression-free and overall survival at the interim. We received FDA approval through the PMA pathway based on expedited review. After a struggle, we got our data published in JAMA. It's tough when you're new. And in July, we were designated as a standard of care by what's called the NCCN, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network. And as we've discussed today, we are reimbursed essentially universally by the private pay infrastructure in the US. The median age for GBM is in the 50s. So somewhere between 75 and 80% of our patients are private patients, and they are essentially all reimbursed. We are not yet reimbursed by CMS for the other 20 to 25%. But the therapy is now available at over 580 cancer centers worldwide.
Fantastic. Thank you. David.
So David Lucchino, great to be here. Brian, thank you for having me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Frequency Therapeutics. It's a technology out of MIT and Harvard Medical School. I want to pick up on two themes that Bill brought out, which is it's tough when you're new, and you didn't start life with, you started life as one thing and you wound up as another thing. And that's the case for the technology that I'm working with, which is it's a way of having small molecules delivered locally to different parts of the body in order to have tissue, regenerate essentially in real time. And so it's the idea of regenerative medicine 2.0. You're not pulling anything out of the body and doing anything with it and then putting it back. You're actually harnessing the body's underlying cell signaling in a way to create a disease-modifying benefit. And the technology was originally focused and developed in the GI system, where it's a highly regenerative system, and targeting something called LGR5 stem cells. And so then the question was asked by Bob Langer, and Jeff Karp, where else are those stem cells present? And one of the places where they're present is in the cochlea. And with that, the vision really was, can we regenerate hearing? So when everyone was born, your hair, the hair cells on your cochlea are developed in your mother's womb, but once you're born, that system shuts itself off for the rest of your life. So the hair cells you're born with, 15,000 approximately on each cochlea, are what you die with. And so noise pollution is such a big problem, and you have really a large epidemic of hearing, chronic noise-induced hearing loss, which is our initial target market, that we're looking to sort of really put a couple key points together, which is locally delivering to the ear in order to regenerate hair cells to restore hearing is really kind of what the company's been sort of rallying around over the last year and a half. We've been successful with fundraising through family offices and private sources to date, and have a team of 8 full-time people and a proof of concept, and are actively pursuing a path not dissimilar to Bill's, where you want to engage with the FDA very early, get their feedback, and allow them to help guide the best ways in which you're able to help patients. The other key point I would make is that this is not limited to regenerating hearing or regenerating tissue in the cochlea. This has application much like CRISPR or gene therapy does, of creating disease-modifying benefits really in a relatively short period of time in the body, in the eye, muscle, and but the area of focus for this company has really been on regenerating hearing and essentially wanting to ultimately eliminate the need for hearing aids.
Fantastic. Stefan?
Thank you. Brian, thank you for inviting me. So I'm kind of new to the medical device world. I'm an inventor, engineer, and Airing's device is a small device that fits in your nose that has been designed to treat obstructive sleep apnea. There are millions and millions of people who stop breathing every night. They do it while they're sleeping so that they don't know that until they get an elbow or something. And then if they're diagnosed with this, they have to use a piece of equipment called a CPAP machine. Continuous positive airway pressure is the treatment. It's effective for preventing the apnea events or diminishing them. The problem with the treatment itself is very effective. It's the equipment that delivers the treatment is a big box, hose, a mask, there's straps, and a significant number of people just cannot tolerate that. So I invented a microfluidic pump for a completely different reason. It turns out that it's amenable to being manufactured in a manufacturing paradigm called roll-to-roll or continuous processing, which is a way to be able to produce small devices, microelectromechanical system, MEMS devices, at extremely small scale and low cost. And so if you can put enough of these small devices that can blow air, make it battery operated, into a very small device that fits under your nose and in your nose, then if you push the right amount of air at the right pressure, you can deliver the CPAP therapy. And so we talked to a number of doctors. I did not know much about OSA, obstructive sleep apnea, and I found out that it's really an epidemic. It's tens and tens of millions of people, and it's frustrating for the doctors because the therapy is effective, it works, but people won't use it. So I believe in this world, just because you do something doesn't mean you should. And so if you reach out and talk to people and see, would this be helpful for you? And the response was quite positive, extremely positive. Our social media presence kind of blew up. Today, I think there's like over 44 million people have viewed some rogue videos on the internet about the Airing device. So I think the real interest is out there for people to be able to use something like that. So I think one of your questions that I was trying to adhere to was, what were some of the challenges? So this is only possible, the Airing device, because of the invention of the microblower, the little microfluidic pump. And we're in the proof of concept stage on that right now. So we are building that device, testing it on a bench. We will then put it into some test devices and do some informal testing before we go to the FDA for more clinical trials and tests approval. So if I had to list the two largest or biggest challenges that you asked me to think about, one would be to make the technology work. There's always that, right? And I think the second is to actually have it manufactured in the way it needs to be manufactured. Roll-to-roll processing is well developed. It's been developed for a number of things. Photographic film, Band-Aids, I think, are made using roll-to-roll processing. But this is innovation, the little microblowers. So getting that to be produced in volume, low cost, and therefore available for people to use the micro CPAP device is critical. So proving a technology does what it's supposed to do with moving the right amount of air at the right pressure and having it be able to be manufactured. The approval we expect is likely to be not terrible. We aren't inventing CPAP therapy. We're just miniaturizing the piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And so I think that probably would be my answer to your questions.
Very good. Sam, I'm going to hand this to you.
Thank you, Aidan. I think I should also, yes. First, want to publicly apologize to Aidan for taking his chair, but it would have looked ridiculous if I sat with those other three guys, so you'd be laughing. My name is Samuel Strafacci. I'm the president and CEO of MedRobotics, and we're located in a town of Raynham, which probably no one really knows, but it's 30, 40 minutes south of here without traffic. Probably an hour or so with traffic. Anyways, the MedRobotics has developed and is commercializing now around the world the world's first flexible surgical robot. So we got FDA clearance about October or so last year. We got CE mark probably the year before. We're located in Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America, and we're a direct sales organization as well. The robot is unique in that it is, again, the first flexible surgical robot. It was spun out of Carnegie Mellon University, one of the world's foremost experts in an area called snake robots is located there. And the technology enables surgeons now to navigate into distant parts of the body through a single opening and not be constrained by line of sight issues that are typical of almost every other surgical platform. So the benefit is that now patients who would typically not be surgical candidates can now be offered a minimally invasive option. Patients who would typically be offered chemoradiation only, and believe me, they do have some issues with that on a longer term basis, can now be offered a surgical option, maybe with de-escalation on the chemoradiation. All good at the end for the patient. And obviously a patient that would otherwise have had open surgery, which would be extremely invasive, would now have a minimally invasive approach. Last night in Germany, a patient had a T3 tumor, very large T3 tumor removed from the lower throat near the esophagus, and typically they would have opened up the neck from the side and taken out the tumor that way, but they did it transorally with our robot. And that patient still in the hospital right now, but likely to go home tomorrow. And that is clearly a benefit. Now, Germany's a little different. Germany, they like to keep their patients a little longer, but certainly if they were the US, they would have kicked them out probably tonight. The benefit clearly is the overall cost to both the patient in time and energy, as well as to the healthcare system, is quite significant if they're going through an open surgical procedure. This reduces it quite significantly. Did I answer all three?
That's good.
Good.
So thank you for that, particularly as we're just tucking into some steak. So let's talk about disruption, because in each case there is a component of the industry that you're disrupting. So if you could just speak a little bit about who you're, the aspect that you're disrupting, and then we'll come to how do you demonstrate the value such that you can get the appropriate investment and so forth in the industry. Bill, I'll go again.
So I'll pick up on a theme that I touched on earlier, which is that oncologists for 100 years have focused on three ways essentially of treating cancer, and they have created disciplines. There are surgical oncologists, there are radiation oncologists, and there are medical oncologists. And each of those fields has developed around a therapeutic modality. People have developed expertise in very specific areas. Reimbursement has evolved to compensate those practitioners to do, in a sense, what they've always done. An interesting aside, medical oncologists get paid to administer infuse chemos, and they don't get paid for orals. Guess what? Most chemotherapies are infused, whether they need to be or not. And again, I don't take that away from the system. It's just the way it works. We all know surgeons operate. That's what they're trained to do, and that's what they do. So we're coming in with something that no one studied in medical school. no one saw coming. Most oncologists I talk to don't know what an electric field is. I get questions, is that like, and in fact, when they usually tell it back to me, it always comes back as magnetism. And it's also an area, although you can say the same thing about all the other areas of medicine, there is a historic snake oil element to the use of so-called bioelectronic medicine. So we're changing really the landscape of oncology. It's a true disruption to the field. I mentioned GBM, but we're working on brain metastases, which are much more common than GBM. We have great data in non-small cell lung cancer. We have great data in pancreatic cancer. Later this year, we'll share our first data in ovarian cancer. The technology is also prophylactic. So one of the areas, and what I mean by that is if you take an animal and you put our transducers on it and then inject melanoma in the tail vein, those animals will not form tumors in the lungs. So you can now think of a concept like organ protection. If you're a woman with a BRCA1 family history, BRCA1 gene, and your course of care today is a prophylactic mastectomy, the future potential is some tumor treating field therapy. So it's just a big shift.
There is a missionary component to what you're doing, where you're going to have to form a new path. David, it sounds like you have this is a little bit more open space. Is that correct? Are you disrupting anything, or are you just finding a white space?
I think, absolutely disrupting something, but I guess what I would say, disruptors don't live in a world unto themselves. There are sales channels and ways in which, doctors currently charge and make money for their practice, and so you have to account for that as you think about strategically how you want to roll out what it is that you're doing and how you want to think through that in a way that you can align incentives. So in our case, there's already a medical code for doing it. What we would do is do a local injection into the ear, so through your eardrum, and then you drop a gel in your middle ear. There's already a procedure code for doing that. ENTs are already scheduled to know how to do that procedure, so you don't need to educate them on that. What you need to then understand is how within that system are you going to potentially deliver your therapy, how the doctors and the audiologists who work hand in hand get paid, and how do you gain their support in doing that. So I take a practical eye. My job is to build shareholder value around a disruptive technology, and not all of us can be Elon Musk, but in my world, I think about this very thoughtfully, because there is a whole body of art that you need to account for as you look to go in and make some significant adjustments to it.
Stefan, the CPAP world has you coming its way.
Yeah, so disruptive, I guess to me, would be, I've seen a lot of technology where they're kind of incrementally different, they're not so different, and there's a lot of factors that go into what might make one technology more popular than another. When you have something that is pretty significantly different, in our case, you have the option of the traditional way to receive the CPAP therapy is to have a box with a hose and a mask and a strap. And I could go on and on to tell you how much people dislike that. Now you have something that you literally just stick under your nose, in your nose, and if it performs the same function, pushes the right air at the right pressure, I can't think of anybody that I've spoken with that would choose the first thing over the other. So one of the things that I could say about that was just kind of funny to hear, we have a member of our technical advisory board, Dr. Michael J. Sema. He works at MIT. And early on, when we were getting the response that we were getting in social media, and the rumors that were rattling around with the status quo. He said, well, Stefan, you know, you can't unring a bell. You know, we all know that expression, right? He said, so, you know, what you've done is you've informed people that, you know, maybe they can actually get this treatment from a device that's not medieval and don't mean any disrespect there, but that people just really can't tolerate. And he said, this is going to happen. Maybe your technology won't be in it even, but he said, but these people have gone to their normal service providers and said, we want the thing with no mask and with no hose. And so it's, I think, completely disruptive. I think it's going to be unfortunate for some of those companies because they will find that, I think that there's not a big demand for their equipment.
No, this is the market is already there. They just,
Huge.
it's just got to, you have to produce it.
And there's that, right?
Right. And Sam, I imagine you've got to train a whole bunch of surgeons in a whole bunch of things that they didn't do before. But what are the other sort of disruptions that you see MedRobotics having on the industry?
Well, you know, if you've been in the surgical field for as long as I have, several decades, you would have heard the term NOTES surgery or natural orifice surgery. It's been around. It's been a dream of the surgical profession now for multiple decades, and really pretty much since laparoscopic surgery first came into place in the 1980s and 90s. We're the first company to actually do it, actually get FDA clearance and actually do it. So we can enter through a natural orifice and allow the surgeon to operate in distant locations. It's also referred to as scar-less surgery, so no scar, no access through the body. So yeah, it does require a totally different training regime for the surgeons, and to be quite honest, it's not a day that goes by that we don't hear a surgeon saying, huh, I've never seen the anatomy that way before. And every specialty wants to create a new atlas of anatomy from the perspective of a flexible robot now. So yeah, it will change many ways. I mean, if God forbid you ever need surgery and it's an option, it'll be a good option for you because it won't hurt as much. It's one of the challenges that we have is that patients feel so damn good that they go home and play soccer with their kids afterwards, not realizing they had major surgery only hours before. So that is a complication that we're seeing more and more, which is a good one, I guess. So I think the profession is adopting it. It's slow at start, as you would expect it would be. There is a lot of training. We do a lot of that training ourselves. Our facility down in Raynham is well equipped to do that. We have doctors flying from all over the world on a weekly basis to do it. And that's part of the business of education. And of course, we have key opinion leaders situated around the world who also train surgeons in their regions to do this new surgery.
So I'll hand this back to you and go the other way. But in terms of quantifying, you had to raise a lot of money in order to get to where you are today. In terms of being able to quantify in each case what the value proposition into the market, how easy was that to do when you've got a disruptive technology?
I can think of at least 10, 12 nightmares that, you know, ended the company, pretty much ended the company. So it was extremely hard. And you know, when we first started raising money, and we've raised, you know, $150 million, so, you know, pretty decent sum of money. In the earliest stages, raising money was pretty tough. Granted, it was 2008 and 2009, which wasn't the easiest time to begin a company with the financial crisis. You know, a lot of so-called sophisticated investors said, it can't be done, you won't be able to do it, and so forth. So, and I'm sure every one of these gentlemen and their teams have heard that multiple times. You sort of expect it now. So conventional wisdom is things like this can happen. It's too futuristic, and it could have been. There were at least, I said, 10, 12 times where we were so stuck because we couldn't solve an issue, which we had to, obviously, to get here. And that's even before we went to the FDA, which obviously was challenging in itself.
Thank you. Stefan, how do you look investors in the eye and say this is going to be big?
Well, so as an invention, something that hasn't existed before, if you're risk adverse, it starts there and doesn't go uphill much. We spent some time talking to some venture capitalists indirectly. First, we talked to people who happen to work for a venture capital firm, and then with the extreme interest there, it kind of grew into a more formal discussion. But after, a year or so, we got kind of frustrated. I guess there's sort of a trend moving away from medical devices and more into software and things like that in the medical space. So we decided to try to take some control without absolutely no guarantee, of course. So we did a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo because I felt that we could at least control the process. We couldn't guarantee anybody would make a contribution, but we could at least control the process. So made us feel a little bit better. So that was very successful. To date, we've raised $1.6 million on that. And this is non-dilutive funding because it's contribution from people who suffer from sleep apnea. We thought it would be very interesting to actually have people who, real stakeholders, that would actually fund the development of this technology. Somebody whose return on investment was probably a longer, healthier life than maybe a few more dollars in the bank. We have over 17,000 contributors now, so it's a little bit of pressure. Like kids in the back seat, are we there yet? Are we there yet? We get thousands of emails every day from people who want to know when they can buy it. And we did such a good job with the appearance model that they think it already exists. So we have to explain that also, that, that was, if you read on the video, it says appearance model only, proof of concept prototype is where we are. So just real quick, I would tell you that I would recommend crowdfunding to a lot of people for three main reasons. I guess the first is you could raise a little bit of money to help you with your development. But the second is the confirmation, that sort of external validation that what you have is important, it is of interest. And the third is the reach it gives you, that these global, multi-billion-dollar companies are reaching out to us to want to be involved in the manufacture and the distribution of that sort of thing. So funding-wise, I guess I come from an old world that says you can never have enough money to do what you're doing. So 150 sounds great. We've had a small percentage of that, I can tell you, but I think that there's enough interest out there that we'll be able to do okay.
Yeah. Good.
So.
Now, David, you're completely at the other end of the spectrum, which is you're largely funded by a British public crew, PureTech. Is that correct?
So that was my previous company that I ran. So this company, I've been funded primarily through family offices and high net worth individuals to date. And I can tell you that there's been a high level of enthusiasm for what we're doing. But with that enthusiasm, comes risks. You want to manage expectations. This is a journey. We have a lot of compelling early data, and so you want to use that enthusiasm, but you want to use it wisely. So as we look to attract more institutional investors at this point, the enthusiasm remains very high. But again, I've done this long enough to know you're going to have ups and downs, and so you want to take a very rational approach even when the winds are at your back.
Yeah. Thank you. And lastly, I think because we're nearly are we at our mark pretty much? Bill, if you'd like to just address that.
I take a deep breath because we've raised over $500 million. There's no way to be sort of halfway a global oncology company. You have to do the phase 3 trials. If you're a disruptor, and I would imagine this will be true for all the companies here, it's generally more true, but you're very far away from an acquisition in that it's not just about demonstrating technology or regulatory approval or reimbursement. You have to take it all the way to turning it into a business before a team at an acquirer will take a career risk around something that has no precedent. And by then, you're probably worth too much for them to buy you anyway. You know, and there's some history with respect to that. So I think what that means, for better or for worse, is that the opportunities have to be enormous.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's too bad, because I think there's a lot of incremental, innovative opportunities that would do a lot of people a lot of good. And it used to be there's no such thing as layups. You know, nothing was easy, but there used to be relatively direct pathways to get things done in this industry. I think there are fewer and fewer of those, which means that I think our attention now goes to these mega opportunities because they're all hard and they're all expensive, so they better be worth it at the end of the day.
Well, thank you enormously. That was a wonderfully diverse panel, and thank you for having us all here. I hope that was useful. I hope supper was good. We're going to have it now.